Okay. Okay. Hello and welcome. Can you hear me? It's 1 2 1 2. No. Now? Now you can hear me. Okay. Hello and welcome to my session. I'm Thomas, and we have only 25 minutes for this topic, which is it's going to be a really rush through these slides. I don't have many slides. I have few hands-on labs. Oh, sorry, hands-on labs. Home labs here. So fingers crossed that it's going to work. And today, in this 25 minutes, I'll talk about how to automate operations. And if I say automate operations, I mean basically using the inbound method to get into Aria Operations to do stuff you usually do using the UI. So we all know using UIs might be cumbersome, and if you have to do things repeatedly, so over and over again, then automating stuff would be much more beneficial than using the UI. And going into Aria Operations means you could use things like Postman, orchestrator workflows, automation, whatever you want, PowerShell scripts, Python scripts. There is almost no limitation how to use the REST API because it's just a simple REST API. Automating operations could also mean to go the other way around, so outbound of the Aria Operations, to use the features we have in operations to do stuff on behalf of Aria Operations. Like, for example, if you have any alerts and you would like to remediate them automatically, you could use webhooks, you could use notifications, orchestrator workflows to do something, to lower your operating efforts just to make things being automated. Because we have only those 25 minutes, I'm going to focus on the inbound method, so how to use the REST API, what are the typical, let's say, steps you always use to start with the API, what are a few recommendations, how to use it. So let's get started. And first, use case is always very nice to describe what we're doing. And there are a few use cases from the field, like, for example, maybe you would like to onboard new adapter instances automatically. Let's imagine you have your private cloud and you have your service catalog and you offer your consumers to deploy databases. And at the same time, you would like to ensure that anytime a new database, Postgres, MySQL, whatever, is onboarded, you would like to create the appropriate adapter instance in operations to monitor the database. Of course, you could do it manually, but that's not real self-service, right? Another example is, let's imagine you have a slightly bigger and for whatever reason you have to restart your 10, 100 vCenter adapter instances, or you need to take things into maintenance. All those things you can do using the UI, but of course it doesn't scale. But for almost everything, we have a REST API call. And the other thing is, the last two use cases in here is, even if we have tons of devices, tons of applications, whatever, with metrics, with properties in Aria Operations out of the box, it might happen, and probably it will happen sooner or later, that there are properties or metrics missing. And as long as you know how to retrieve that information from the source, you can use the REST API to push that metric as your custom metric, custom property into operations to enrich what's already available out of the box. And it doesn't stop with out-of-the-box objects. You can even ingest your own objects. Like, for example, you would like to manage the racks where your blades, centers, or servers are being built in, together with the power devices, the cooling devices. As long as there is a way to retrieve that information about those racks, about those power devices, cooling devices, you can use the REST API to create those custom objects, to push the metrics, to relate those, let's say, rack devices with the blade servers, blade enclosures in this rack, to have a complete visibility into your infrastructure. So now, how to start with this before we jump into the demo? How to start if you are completely new to REST API? Who never used the REST API before in operations? So quite few. the easiest way to learn how to use it, or to even see what's available, is just to go to the Suite API. You go to your HTTPS, your operations instance, Suite API, and you will get the Swagger UI documentation of every single REST call we have in operations. On top of this, if you click on a call, for example, a post call, which expects a JSON body, you're going to get a example how this body should look like. But, and I will show you this in a few seconds, that's just an example. That's a generic example, like if you would like to create a new credential set, right? So credential sets are, of course, different depending on what adapter instance it is. A credential set for vCenter will be different than a credential set for Kubernetes. And it will be different than a credential set for Postgres. So the structure is always the same, but the content will be different. How to deal with it, show you in a second. And the next thing is, we have also the model description for everything in this documentation. So just as an example, you would like to push a new metric, or you need to create an adapter instance, and there is a field, let's say it's a timestamp, and you don't know what format it is. Or you need to push some metric, some data, some number data, and you don't know what type it is. You can simply click on the model, and it will show you the description of every single field, if it is string, if it's a double, or an array of strings, or whatever it might be. So it makes it easier to create your own calls with the appropriate body in it. And another thing, we have the public and the internal API. So you see that up there is a menu you can select between public and internal API. The difference is the public API, as the name implies, is public. So it's fully supported. You can use it in your own workflows, your own automation. If there will be any changes in upcoming versions, we're hopefully going to inform you about those changes in what's new and readmes and so on. If you have any issues, then we're going to help you with those codes. So because this is what we're using internally as well. Whereas the internal API is slightly different. It is, let's say, supported from the perspective of how it works in a certain version. So, but it's completely up to you to make sure that if you use those internal calls, you need to ensure that before you upgrade, patch, whatever Aria operations, you test it before you upgrade. Or you do some upgrades in a test environment, test your workflows using the internal calls, because we do not guarantee that an internal call will be exactly the same in the next version. It might be that we change some nuances like data types. It could also be that we move an internal call into the public section. So please, you can use it, and we use it also internally, but just be aware that before you upgrade operations or install a patch, test your internal calls in a test environment. And there is a third API we have, that's probably the least known API, it's the CASA API. So the previous ones, the public and the internal Suite API, is really to use the product. To retrieve metrics, to push metrics, to create adapter instances, etc., etc. The CASA REST API is to manage the platform itself. So if you need to restart a node, or you need to retrieve information about what's the status of a cluster, is it online, is it offline, you need to change the admin password automatically in a programmatic method. You need to change the cluster status. So you want to set it offline, and you would like to use automation for this. Then you go to the CASA API. This one is also documented, but it's not that up to date compared to the Swagger UI. Good. Then, as I told you, like in this example, we have a call API credentials to create post call to create new credential sets. So before you create a new adapter instance and you start it, you almost always need a credential set. Like for vCenter, you need the username, password, and so on. And that's just an example. If you go to the Swagger documentation, you will get this, the example value. And you see it, it's described for what type of credential set it will be used. So it's vCenter, and then it's an array of fields. You see it in here. There is a fields array of key values. And this array is always there. So any post credentials call will have this fields array, but what's inside, of course, depends on the adapter kind. And the easiest way to create your own post body is just create one example adapter instance using the UI, use the get call to get this adapter instance, check the fields array, and change it to use it in your post call. The same applies to creating new adapter instances. I mean, the credentials one, the example is pretty simple. There's not that much. Usually it's like source, username, password, you're done. And if you're creating adapter instances, it's more complex, right? For example, if you check the vCenter adapter instance, there are so many switches, so many options. Not every option is mandatory. Some can be omitted, some not, and so on. And for them, it's also the easiest way is to create it manually in a UI, use the get, see what's inside, change it, adopt it, use in post call, you're done. And now let's see how it looks like in reality. Oh yeah, we are here. So that's the Swagger UI, as I explained. You can use the Swagger UI, as usually with all Swagger UIs, directly to run the calls from the web browser. So the first thing you need to do is to authorize. I am already authorized, so I believe my token is still valid. So you can go in and say, let's see what adapter instances we have. So you just go to get, you go to try it out, execute, and here we have a list of all my adapter instances in my environment. So it's pretty long, but it's helpful to get started, to just see what's available. Usually, if you would like to do some tests before you write your scripts, your orchestrator workflows, whatever you use, I tend to use I'm using Postman to do this. And the weird thing is I see Postman there, I don't see Postman here. Okay, then so the first call you will always use is to acquire a token. In Asian versions of operations, we use the username password authentication, but it wasn't working pretty well. Anytime it was creating a structure in the code, in memory, and it wasn't that secure. So we changed to token authentication, so that the first thing is you just acquire a token. It's also described in a Swagger UI. It's pretty easy. You send it, and you get your token. Of course, in the end, you will need some logic in your script to retrieve the token from the JSON response. And the token is valid. That's also important. The token is valid for 6 hours. But if you use the token, anytime you use it, it's getting extended. So, but even if you use it, I would also recommend to implement some kind of a token life cycle in your script. So I don't know if I have this on the slide, but you can contact me afterwards. I have a Git repo with few workflows, and there's also a workflow how to life cycle the token used in Orchestrator. If you know Orchestrator, you can have configuration items in Orchestrator. That's what I'm using when I'm storing the token, checking if it's still valid. If it's not valid for at least 5 minutes, retrieve a new one, replace it, so I simply do not overuse the REST API. So now the token is, so in my Postman, I already stored the token in a variable, so I can use it for other calls. And let's pretend we would like to stop adapter instances. Let's remove this for a second. Command for the second and run it. It's the same what I did in the Swagger UI. So you see there is a pretty long output of all adapter instances I have in my environment. But if your task is to restart vCenter adapter instances only, then almost every REST call has either, if it's a GET, then of course there is nobody, but there are options. So like for this one, let's make it back. I can use the object ID if I know the object ID, but if this is your first call, you don't know the object ID. But what you can do is you can at least limit the list of the adapter instances to a certain type. So now I told Aria Operations to give me all adapters with the adapter kind key VMware. So adapter kind key is probably new to few of you. So the adapter kind key is the internal type. So we could have used words like type, but we didn't. I don't know why, so it's called adapter kind key, but that's the type. And VMware is the vCenter adapter. And now if I scroll down, I see that in the bottom of this output, I have my ID. So now again, it's going to be part of your automation script. You need to extract this somehow. I will simply set it to my object ID variable, and now I can use it in subsequent calls. And one of those calls might be a stop adapter instance. So again, that's my suite API adapters object ID monitoring state stop. Can run it. We'll say 200, so we're good. And if I go to my operations screen, and here we go, we see this one is now in not collecting. So, and for one adapter instance in the UI, of course you can use the UI to click it, but just imagine you have 10 of them or 20. That's an easy way to do this. Or you can even have a self-service catalog for if you the operations administrator, you can create and you work with the automation guys, you could create an easy self-service catalog for the vCenter admins to restart adapter instances when they need to do this. So you don't have to do this on your own. Now let's go back and start it again. So monitoring state start, send it, and it will take a few seconds probably to start it again, but we should, yeah, it's already collecting. It will turn green in a few seconds. So now the example with creating adapter instances. It's also important thing is create adapter instance vCenter. So on this one here, so again 25 minutes, we don't have that much time, but if you go for the Suite API adapters, you would like to create adapter instances automatically, you will always have the same structure with name, description. Collector ID is the number of the cloud proxy or cloud proxy group you would like to have this instance be running on. So this is something, of course, you need to retrieve before you run this call. If you have only one adapter instance, only one cloud proxy, that's easy. You just run a GET on an existing one and you have the ID. If you have multiple cloud proxies and you need to decide when to run the new adapter instance, then you go to the Swagger UI, you figure out what's the REST call for GET cloud proxies, you collect the proxies, you retrieve the ID, you put it into this call, and you run it. Same for the resource identifiers. The resource identifiers is again an array. It's always there, but the content is of course depending on what adapter kind it is. For vCenter, you will probably recognize then we have the usual options we have when we create those instances in a UI, like port group disabled, enable actions, disable actions, and you will get all those information when you just run get on an existing one. Now we can use this, and in the end there's also a credential key value. You can either use an existing credential ID, or you can implicitly put the block to create the credential instance into this call. So both works, but you'd see that there is always a, let's say, chain of REST API calls. Get the token, get the object IDs of objects you would like to manipulate, run the code, get the IDs of other objects which might be needed for this one, and execute it in the end. So if I run this one, so it's okay, 201. So as an output, I will get the description of the new vCenter adapter instance. And if I go back to my operations, I have my Explore demo. It's not started because just a dummy. There is no vCenter behind this. But now you can, once it is created, you get the ID as the response for your post. You can use this ID in the next step to start the adapter instance, and you are done in a few seconds. There is a call to accept the certificate also. So if you have different certificates, usually if you start something, you test something, you will get this certificate warning window where you need to accept the thumbprint. There's also a call to do this automatically. So things like creating adapter instances, restarting adapter instances, creating credentials, and changing passwords can be all done using the REST API. I have 3 minutes left. I will switch back to the presentation when I find it here. There are a few things I'll just show you on the slide. Important thing when you use the internal API, and there are calls which are only available in the internal API, and usually if you start creating more complex workflows, you will end up in the internal API, for sure. So one thing you need to know is you need to set this, this header. With this header, we just you just acknowledging that you know what you're doing. And the login, or what I already showed you, is going to be used as authorization. It's a bearer token, but also we're good in renaming things and giving things new names. We just renamed the bearer into the visualize ops token, but it is like it is. Just use it. And the third important thing to remember is anytime you run a post call and you have to set a timestamp, like creation time when you're creating a new instance of an object, or you pushing metrics, like if you're pushing numbers, that it's called data. Data is basically telling operations that the array will be an array of double. Or if you say values, that's going to be an array of strings. But that's everything, that's all you can read in the documentation, that's easy. The important thing is sometimes you have to set the timestamp, and sometimes you can set it to null. It's something you just need to try it out. Sometimes it's obvious. When you create an adapter instance, for example, you can set it to null because operations will simply say, okay, the timestamp for creating this adapter instance or new object or whatever is simply the time I have received the call. Whereas when you're pushing metrics or properties, you need to set the timestamp. Otherwise, operations will not know where to place this metric in the time series data database. It should be placed in the right position from a time perspective. So you need to set it. And maybe one last thing, 50 seconds. Please do all those things in a test environment. Because you can create adapter instances. You can create, anytime you create a new object type, like for example, rack or power device or whatever it might be, it's Operations will create the device itself. It will create a new adapter instance type for you. And there are things you can remove afterwards. But there are also things you can delete, but only with special command lines, stuff like that. And it could even happen that maybe there will be some leftovers after your testing. And I know customers, they did a lot of testing in operations and ended up with, it's not breaking anything, but it doesn't look nice if you have, some weird names in operations, in dashboards, whatever. So if you test the REST API, just do it in your test environment. And the top of my time, sorry, I cannot cover the outbound. Maybe next time I will do a session about the outbound way to operate or to automate things using Aria Operations. If you have questions, you can also find me at the hands-on labs. I'll be there all the 4 days. And the last thing is management big builder, just integration SDK. There will be also an integration SDK tomorrow, I think, here. And please take your stay. And stay connected. And the last thing is, you can also join the hackathon, and maybe there's a chance to do some hands-on with a few experts. That's all I have. Thank you very much.